Hello, leavers and believers. Welcome to Leaving Hillsong. My name's Tanya, and we are here with By the Door of the Ear Part 2, featuring Scott and Kat, a long-time couple who both started at Hillsong and left Hillsong with very different as well as similar experiences, very distinct experiences that they've been sharing with us, and so generously. Today we go back to some of what we had started last time in part 1. If you haven't heard it, make sure you grab it. We started talking about the construction of the Hillsong service musically and how that is planned and timed and scheduled to a T. And we're going to really pull the whole service apart here and pull Gary Clark apart a little bit at the end. So there's lots here. I'm talking about who's talented and what it's like to, be a part of that machine and feel the pressures of the greatness that is Hillsong music. Some of these songs have hundreds of millions of views on YouTube. This is not a small game. This is not the minor leagues. So very grateful to Kat and Scott, and I hope you enjoy part 2. By the Door of the Ear.
How long were you at London for?
I was in London on and off for 2 years, but the second year in particular, I was living with people who were very, very plugged into the creative team at Hillsong London. So I was getting a real inside view on what it was like without giving too much of my time to it. Yeah, so I lived with a really nice bunch of people who were all giving, they must have been giving 15 hours plus to volunteering a week at Hillsong London. I would, 15 hours on a less committed week and up to probably 30 hours on a busy week. And then they all volunteered, the whole way through conferences and all of that as well. But the big contrast that I really noticed between the band at Hillsong London and the band at Hillsong in Sydney was that due to the nature of London, which it's a very creative city with a lot of work for musicians, nearly all of the musicians in the band at Hillsong London were professional working musicians. So that meant that the music was quite... Yeah, I mean, yeah. So, the music was style of
working on a volunteer basis, yeah?
So they were volunteering at Hillsong, but they were working, their day job was to work as a musician elsewhere, sessions or, whatever gigs they were doing week in, week out. So that meant then that the musical style of Hillsong in London was quite different to Sydney, because the thing that Hillsong has done expertly really is they've created a formula for band playing that allows people with not really a lot of musical experience or knowledge to be able to play well. So they've split all of their instrumental music into parts. They've got pretty predictable chords. The things that make it appealing to listen to are also making it quite easy to play for a lot of different types of musicians with not necessarily a strong background, in music. But then in London, because all these people were working musicians, it had quite a different style because they're all like professional improvisers. They all have like very good skills on their instruments, like high level skills. And so the band was actually quite dynamic and like interesting to listen to, different to Sydney.
Yeah, now. What do you say about Sydney? Come on now.
Well, you go to Sydney and it's you could almost think you're listening to the track, like you're hearing the one riff that's played. It's actually on these days, right? Because they actually now play a track in the background when they play a song, a Hillsong song. There's a track, and then if you're playing in the band at Hillsong, you're expected to just actually play over the top of the track the same thing, the same riff, the same line. And if you do something different to that, that's too rebellious and it's too complicated and they don't want it.
Of course. Like off course. Wow.
Yeah, at Hillsong London, they were required to play the tracks because this is the thing, like it was being pushed from Sydney to be playing the tracks. But because all the musicians were so good at Hillsong London, what they would do is they'd actually, in a lot of cases, like the track they would play would just be like a bed of sound, maybe like a pad sound. They'd like say in a slow song, they'd be playing a sustained note on a track or something like a chord line, rather than the full track that they would use in Sydney, which would include all these parts that are going to be played by the musicians anyway, right? So if you're playing in Sydney, your role's quite boring in a lot of ways because here's the track playing what you're going to play anyway. Like, so you're just playing over the top of it, the same thing. So that was kind of what the style had morphed into by the time I was at Hillsong London. But they weren't really doing that because they're all such good musicians. Like, they were very versatile in what they could do. And so they were continuing to improvise a lot on like the structure of each song and come up with their own ideas, which is what they would do professionally as musicians.
How are they allowed to get away with that if you're not allowed to veer off course?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there was a bit of a push to be more like Sydney, but it was a hard push to make there because they've been doing it a certain way for so long already. They were trying to push the culture more in the direction of Sydney, but it was a slow-going sort of process. But you could watch them up there on the stage and they were having fun as they played, because they enjoyed putting their own mark on the music. Like, that was essentially like the big difference to it.
I just remember it being a bit of a weird experience going from like Hillsong in Sydney to Hillsong in London because the change and the difference in the music made it like, I think a part of me had just been trained so hard to like replicate as best as possible the sound on the albums that as soon as I walked in, I was like, so what's wrong with you?
I mean, early days, Jeff Bullock has spoken about this, a number of times, is that was the idea, is replicate mainstream. And then, we were talking about all the changes and stuff as you were saying, as culture changes and the zeitgeist changes and, the style changes. Tell me again, because you're classically trained, how that then influences those hobby players you were talking about.
Well, I remember when this change first came about in Sydney, right? So when the tracks, so it was a real marked change in around 2011 or 2012. I can't remember the exact time. But I remember we got this pep talk upstairs at Hillsong City that tracks were here to stay and that you better learn what's in the tracks and you better learn how to play exactly like the track. Because that's what we're doing now. And the person who was speaking, it's like that person that you don't like who's in your family, but you can't get rid of them because they're here to stay. That was so maybe she didn't like it either. I don't know, and it did. It just really, like, for anyone with any kind of skill in music, it makes it pretty boring to play, right? Because like you're just playing over the top of a track. It'd be like if you were at home and you've put a track on on your speaker and you've got your instrument and you're just like playing along with it, a little tiny piece of the music. So instead of like previously you would be, say I'm a keyboard player, you'd be actually contributing quite a lot to the foundation of the band on that instrument. But you could stop playing now with the track going and, yes, you would notice that the person's not playing because the volume would change, but essentially what they were playing would still be there in the mix because it's on the as well.
Yeah. It's funny because like when you've got your ears on, you hear the track go. So it'll be like sinking deep. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then you start singing or whatever.
It's so spiritual. So worshipy.
Yeah, you can kind of hear them they're quite, present during the track.
So when you're classically trained.
Yeah. What
how you were saying, like when you're classically trained, you get to develop your techniques and stuff. Because it's just so interesting in terms of how it affects the culture, music being really the currency and the economy of this place and the language. And you're talking about remember you were saying like when you're classically trained, you can develop your skills to their peak and apply them somewhere else.
Yes, yeah. So, the appeal of classical training for a lot, like I'm I don't work very much as a classical musician these days. I mostly work in folk and contemporary. The thing that I value about my classical training is that it developed my technique to a much higher level than I would have developed it otherwise, you know. And I know plenty of other musicians who work primarily in contemporary who have had like either a high level of classical training or jazz training or both, you know, and that would be where they predominantly got their skills from. The thing about Hillsong in Sydney is that because Sydney is a different type of city, say, to London, which I mentioned, you know, has a lot of work for musicians, Sydney does not have so much work for musicians. So that just naturally means then in Sydney, a lot more of the musicians who are volunteering don't necessarily have a profession, you know, like a high level of skill on the instrument.
Or professional practice.
They might not even have had that many lessons on their instrument. They may have predominantly taught themselves how to play, you know, but it's not really a problem because they're just playing like simple riffs. They're playing chord progressions on like synthesizer pad sounds, which don't really require a high level of skill, you know, to be able to execute. And that's kind of the beauty of the Hillsong band and why it's able to replicate far and wide, because that's how they've designed it for that kind of player. You know?
I mean, I don't know if you want to even go here. Are we going anywhere near the story of Hillsong United then? And was that just a replication of a replication of a replica until it was ready to be handed to the boss's son because he could just replicate it? Is that how that works?
I mean, I have no idea what kind of training those people have had. You know, the fact is that everything that they have designed the way that the Hillsong band plays, like it's come from them largely and come from, you know, like your Nigels and these other people who were clearly like professional musicians. They have not really dictated how it is that the band fits together and plays. It's more those people in United, I would say. And
I mean, they're very heavily produced, right?
Yeah.
So like there are a lot of very skilled producers within the Hillsong worship team.
Yeah.
And I think the ones that get elevated, like, you know, I know a couple of them at least, but like, you know, these are people who are working professionally.
Because the style is
you know,
schmick, isn't it? Like it's clearly not made by.
Well, I mean, I got to say, during some YouTube wanderings, I came across a performance in, I don't know, Argentina or somewhere. So it was a much more lively crowd than you get at Sydney anyway. But it was really entertaining. And I was like, oh, I think I've missed something. This is a pretty good concert. And obviously having no clue whatsoever what's talent because, you know, like a culture club wham kid. I can't make any judgment at all. So I've like run along to people and gone like, is Joel talented? And some people are like, yeah, and then other people, not a bar.
Well, I think it depends how you define that talent, you know, like I think
And the songs he's written.
the songs I always liked the Joel songs. I thought when the Joel songs came out, there were some of the stronger ones that we had. Whether or not he was a great musician, I'm not sure. I don't think that the way that the Hillsong band operates necessarily elevates great musicians, as Kat said. Like I think he's probably a pretty good producer, maybe behind the scenes, but then I don't even know. Like I'm pretty sure that like I know the people who would be producing him. So
Right.
yeah, it's
And I mean, this is no personal attack on anybody. This is just an observation of the culture and, you know, the inner circle kind of culture as well, because not only did the son of this place get their own band, the daughter ended up being the lead singer of the other band. And I just, the balance of probabilities tells me that, the two most talented singers in the place were not born to the head pastors. Hey,
Scott can talk on the singing.
Yep. No, I mean, like this is
so influential, and when you and who they've chosen or who gets chosen or who runs the thing.
I mean, this is the thing that this is the questions constantly being asked. Is like, how do you end up in a position of authority or creative leadership at the church? How do you end up being a worship leader? You know, there's the on the books way of doing it, which is obviously a bit of propaganda because that's not how it actually works. But the thing that you would say, and it was asked to me, you know, like I would, you know, even from other churches and stuff, like, how do we end up doing what you guys do? And the question was always, be faithful, turn up, serve, be humble. You know, like these are on the books ways of doing it. The fact is that, you know, like within, it was very arcane and very like ephemeral, the process. Like there's no way of really knowing how you would be successful. The fact is that you would see the moment happen, right? So like we were talking about the moment that we saw the Star is Born moment for Aiden, for instance. Like, you know, we were there that night when, you know, they featured his song at team night, and I think it was Elevate, and like Joel Bell, I think it was, got up and was like, "You're amazing, you're going to go far, da 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 da." And then, you know, a couple of years later, he's like the face of, he's the face of Young and Free, you know.
So
and so you see
them, the Travis Scott of this place, is what you're saying. He's an industry player. I watched that video, right? Sorry. It sounds a little bit prearranged.
Who's to know? Like, I mean, the people do know. Somebody knows. But then, like, I also, you know, like I was saying that the part of the fame culture is in some ways, and I don't think that I don't know how much they intend on it being the way that it works, but in some ways it keeps control over your creative team, right? Because you telling people, you know, you're showing people these Star is Born moments. People are getting words of knowledge and prophecy and like being complimented to the extreme from the platform by some of the biggest names at Hillsong, right? You know, you've got Brian taking Taya aside and telling Taya how amazing she is in front of a crowd of 30,000 people, right? These are huge moments that are happening. And then like occasionally, like we were talking about, like, you know, I had a word of prophecy from Julia Bell where I was going to be like the next big thing. I was told I would lead worship in front of thousands of people, and that, you know, and Paul Andrews said the same thing. And it just, what it does is it creates a complex in your head where you're like, well, that's what I'm going to do because God said it. Like, you know, these people speak on behalf of God and they have told me that this is what's going to happen, and I take it seriously and I want that. And so you go on this like journey of like trying to balance the on the books way of becoming a creative and spiritual leader within the church, that being humility and diligence and, you know, all of that stuff that we tell people. So, you know, oh, that's what I'm supposed to do. Have a good character. That's a great one. Versus the core desire. And I have to be honest, I wanted to be in that position. Like I did. I don't know how many other people like are able to be honest about that, but you know, it's something I wanted. I was there for 20 years. Like, but it's also
something you were told that you wanted as well. Sorry, but do you know what I mean? Like when you're surrounded by 30,000 people all cheering you on, like I don't think that's, you know, so unreasonable to think, oh, okay, yeah, this is something, this is real. Well,
yeah, and like you genuinely buy into that, but then when it doesn't happen, it's a complex because you're like, did I do something wrong? Have I done the wrong thing? You know, like they started having conversations with me about moving into being like one of the worship leaders, like on the books worship leaders. And I had a few gigs, you know, like I want to call them gigs, but you know, that's what they are.
Given a shot.
I was given a shot a number of times, put up at Sisterhood, given a Sunday morning service here or there. And then all of a sudden it just stopped. And I wasn't sure what I did. I didn't know. Did I do the wrong thing? Did something happen? No, I just got ghosted. I was just left out in the cold. And we've talked about this, but I don't know, like, I mean, this comes into the thing we've been talking about kind of off the recording, Tanya, but like I'm bisexual and queer, and so I'm quite open about that. And at the time I was invited to talk to Hillsong College students about being a professional artist, because I was also working as an actor at the time. And so I was invited to come and talk to them about how it is being a professional artist as well as being, you know, in the worship team and being a Christian. And they asked me, and I was just honest about it in front of the college. I said, I'm bisexual, I'm queer. And that for me creates tension. And it was around the same time that I was taken off the worship leader books. And I'm not saying that that's what happened, but because I don't know what word got back to them, but it was definitely, you know, there were worship staff in that room.
Correlation,
correlation, not causation. I can't say, but having heard what happened in New York with the queer choir leader who was taken off because he was gay. You know, like I kind of feel like it's not that far-fetched. But the fact is like, if I'm questioning and thinking, was it this? Is this the thing that did it? That's wrong. That shouldn't be an option. Like,
one of the things I have become even more and more aware of are the social networks, that people don't do much else. People don't discuss much else in these places except for other people. And that's just reinforced on reinforced. So, you know, I can almost time it, can't you? When you say something, it'll come back to you 2 days later, 4 people later. But yeah, okay. So just out of interest, what made you talk about that at the college, knowing you would have by then that it wasn't, no one was going to wave their pride flag back at you,
No, I honesty with myself is like
Does that sound horribly victim-y blaming? Sorry, does that sound? I just wondered why.
No. Like,
how
why
that
would I out myself? I don't know why I did that.
Scott's always been an open book. He's
I'm a
not
bit
good
of.
at keeping secrets.
I'm really bad at keeping secrets, but especially about myself. But I'd been through like a massive journey of this. I'd also been in a queer relationship while at church, while serving on team, and with a college student, no less. So I'd gone through this journey of processing that. I had a lot of, and still have a lot of internalized homophobia because of my time at Hillsong and because of my time in the evangelical movement.
Yeah.
And I, at the time, was trying to process how I come to terms with myself, who I am, and who I outwardly am. And I couldn't just get up every weekend and not have people know this. And I didn't care at the time whether people liked that or not about me, because like I tried my best to change things, and all it did was it drove me down really dark pathways. And some of my close friends can talk about that and talk to that. I won't mention it, but like the fact is that like I'd been in this relationship with this guy. I'd met him through a Hillsong Christmas Spectacular as well, which is really funny. But like, we'd been in kind of this, like, it was a very short-lived relationship, but it was incredibly tumultuous and full of turmoil. And, he knew he'd be kicked out of the college. I knew I'd be kicked out of the worship team. Created a real fear around me. And it meant that the relationship that I had with my sexuality was one of fear. And at the time, I was with Kat and I felt really safe. Kat,
when you spoke at college.
When I spoke at college, yeah. So like Kat and I were together at the time.
Okay. Nice.
Kat's wonderfully, like, she was one of the first people, like, we knew each other at the time when I was with this guy, and she knew about everything that was going on and was trustworthy and lovely and had been through the journey with me. And when we ended up together, I felt safe. I felt like I was in, and it's amazing what that relationship has meant for me, feeling safe about talking about my sexuality.
Yeah.
And
just being treated like respectfully and with love.
Yeah. And I just felt like I want that for the other queer guys and queer
beautiful
at church. And when I spoke, I did have a couple of people come up after me and say straight away after the service and in private, they were just like, I am also queer, I'm gay, I'm bi, and I want to, is it possible to go and meet up and have a chat? And I said, yeah, sure. And I never really followed it up because I guess I should have got their number or something, but like I assumed they'd come back and talk about it. But I get how terrifying it is to talk to somebody about that. But like I also knew many, many other people on the worship team who were gay, queer, like these are things that I knew about because somehow as a queer person, you find other queer people because you see the same struggles. And I say struggles, but not internal struggles with your sexuality, because that's not, I don't see it like that anymore. But I mean struggles with systems that make you feel like you should be this way. Like I owe a lot to Ben Gresham, even though like I hadn't really all that much. Hi Ben. But like Ben was open about his sexuality way before I was able to be, and his bravery in that was a real inspiration to me. And I kind of felt like maybe I could be brave and also be an inspiration to somebody else. I don't know if that actually happened, but I know that I wasn't worship leading anymore after that moment. So
it happens. Everybody's just chucks their little bit in, and or their big whatever. Sorry, everyone throws their bit in, and it's just beautiful. And it does what it has to do and what it's supposed to do. That's fantastic. And that's why you were rostered off. Sorry, I'll just confirm that with you now. We are a really, really, really inclusive place, but you know what I mean? Once you're inclusive, you'll toe the party line and you won't be going around having chats with people about how things can be different or veering off course off the music track either. Hey, like it's okay, I'm sorry. And that's a really horrible place to be at. So what happens when you're sitting there and you're ghosted and like, what do you do next?
Well, I didn't pick it at the time. I just thought I'd done something wrong. Like I thought I'd just stuffed up. And so I just went back to being a backing vocalist, and I accepted that as my role. And occasionally I'd get an item here or there to do. And, you know, I just sort of assumed that was my lot. Also at the time I was doing some pretty like big shows that I was really enjoying as an actor. And so I was finding a lot of, and this is kind of coming to the end of my time at Hillsong, and around 2017 is when I started kind of questioning the church, my faith, going through all of that process. And I think what I found was I actually managed to find myself outside of the church, probably because of the lack of movement. I realized I wasn't going to ever be that worship leader. And I think I was able to let go of that dream, that whether I had it or somebody had it for me and made me think it was my dream, I don't know. But I was able to let go of that. And I think, you know, it did end with us leaving. And to this day, nobody has contacted me post that.
You should you should say about what happened when you did leave the worship team.
Oh, it's so stupid. It really is stupid. I was just sort of building up to what happened was, So Ultimate Ears used to sponsor in-ears at church. The in-ears are the things that the musos wear, the headphones that the musos wear to be able to kind of hear themselves in the mix and
fold back.
Yeah, it's essentially like high-tech fold back. But, you know, we have that system at all of the most of the campuses, all of the campuses.
All of them.
And so up until, you know, maybe 4 years ago, Hillsong provided in-ears. So you would turn up, there would be a set there, you'd get some little earbuds that fit your ear, and then you'd put them on and you go on.
Like, I'll just explain though, like, say if you were to stand on a stage with iPhone headphones, for example, they've only got one driver in each ear, like your computer has a driver, right? But on a headphone, you've got one driver. So they've got one driver each to process the sound. They're also not blocking the sound externally from entering your ears, right? So when you're on stage, it's very loud. So if you were to only wear iPhone headphones, you've got a lot of bleed of sound coming into your ears directly from stage. And also you've only got one driver, a simple headphone setup to be able to hear, which means actually you can't hear much at all. So what these other in-ears are, they block the sound. There's noise cancelling, so you're not getting the atmospheric sound. And also they've got 3 drivers in each headphone. So you're getting a high quality sound. You can hear what you're playing or singing. And that's really important to be able to play or sing at Hillsong. Especially
if you're singing, because you can very easily injure your voice singing in these sort of environments. I did for a long time. I basically a doctor had to tell me that I needed to stop singing the way I was because I was going to get nodules. And so I had to kind of learn some technique around 2012 that kind of sort of helped to mitigate the damage I was doing to my voice. But the in-ears are a big part of that, right? Because you can hear yourself so you don't over-sing. So anyway, just a couple of months before we left, I don't know what happened with Ultimate Ears. Maybe they pulled the sponsorship. That's my conspiracy. But anyway, we stopped having in-ears at church. They were gone. I turned up one morning and they were like, "Oh, you didn't get the memo? There are no in-ears." And I was like, "Oh, not even like a spare set anywhere that I can use for today's like session, because I need to be able to hear myself." 3 hours of me singing. Well, yeah, even more than that. You know, I was there from 6 a.m. to like 1 p.m. at some point. You know, is there anything I can use to be able to hear myself? They were like, "Nah, you're just gonna have to find some." So I went and I found some Apple headphones, as we said, some iPhone headphones, and I plugged them in and I sang with these iPhone headphones that day, and it was awful. I couldn't hear a thing. I came off, my voice was like feeling really raw and quite scratchy. And I said to them, like, "Are you ever going to provide them?" They're like, "No, you have to go and buy your own." And these headphones are not cheap, you know, like they range, I think the cheapest are like 150.
But the ones the church were providing originally were worth a few $100s.
Yeah, it's a few $100s. Like, but
you're volunteering for them, and now you've got to.
Exactly. And as we established, I'm not a professional musician. I sing at church. Like, that's what I've done for 15 years. Like, I'm a church singer. So I don't have any use for these outside of their services. So anyway, they're like, "No, you have to go and buy your own. Didn't you get the memo?" And I was like, "No, I didn't. And no, I'm not going to do that." Like, I was at the time, I was borderline leaving. I was like, "No, I'm not going to. I refuse." And they were like, "Well, you're going to have to." So I turned up the next week, no headphones. They were like, "Are you going to get headphones?" I was like, "No." They were like, "Ugh," and got grumpy at me over the things. And I was like, the sound guy's getting grumpy at me. I'm like, "No, I'm not getting them." Next week I turn up, same deal. Anyway, this like ongoing tiff that I'm having sort of spilled over. One one of my mates noticed that I was having this fight because he's
on staff.
He's on staff, and he's genuinely a lovely, lovely individual, and I have a lot of care for him. But he actually went and bought me some in-ears because he felt so bad. Actually, he bought them too late. He gave them to me the week after I left.
What was everybody else doing? Sorry, so did they get you a spare set? Did everyone bring their own? Like
Everybody
went
bought their own.
without.
Everybody bought their own, and I decided I wasn't buying them.
Everyone else just went and spent the $150 or more on, the basic.
And they let you sing.
They just
without them.
Because I was on. They gave me some fallback, or I got to use use my Apple headphones. But I was like, the day we left was the day after the election of Scott Morrison, the one that was just terrible for my industry, for me personally. Like, it meant that I was essentially there was just no hope for the arts. It was 2019, no hope for the arts or education, which are both the places that I work in. And I was absolutely devastated by the election results. And I'd been at a party that night, and I'd gone home absolutely just so upset. And the next morning I turned up at 6 a.m. to do this set, and we were in the middle of worship, and down the front, this guy put his hands in the air right in front of me and started yelling, "ScoMo!" And I was like, what is this? What is this? This is, and I laughed internally, but I was also horrified. I was like, this is the church I'm in?
I'd already stopped going, by the way. So Scott was there on his own.
I was there on my own. I was like, the combination of watching this weirdness taking place in front of me, and the headphones and everything else I'd experienced just came flooding to me that morning. And in the middle of worship, I just put my mic down and I just stood there for the rest of the worship set, and I walked off and I never came back. That was it. I was out. I don't think I even sat in the service that day. I think I walked out of the service, and I just never came back. I was like, this is not my place. This is not my community. These people don't care.
Why are we calling out ScoMo's name in worship again? I forget. Is it all one?
Because he's a Pentecostal. That's all that matters, right?
But okay. Wow, that's scary stuff, man.
There's just a real people. You stay in this environment for so long that you don't even realize that it's absolutely. I have stronger words, but bad. It's just not good. It's you don't realize that it could be any different. And then you step into a church that's actually a church, and you're like, oh my God, Hillsong isn't a church. It's not a church.
Yeah.
There's nothing
but
this environment.
You're such a humble person, but you've also, when you talk about getting over that prophecy stuff, that's a very intense experience. And, I would be thinking a very strong, deliberate, hypnotic instruction. And they have to know the power it has over young people. And I'm convinced that it really does get into the subconscious. And when, years later, your subconscious is going, okay, great, where's the whole world? Why aren't we taking it over? And do you know what I mean? That it would,
yeah.
I don't know, I'm not a psychiatrist, but it would have to result in this horrible conflict internally that you're not even responsible for anymore at all, because it was years ago and programmed into you. And it's just beyond. Yeah, sorry.
I still have to stop sometimes in the middle of my ordinary everyday thing. I'll be at the supermarket, or I'll be watching TV, and I'll be like, is this how my life was supposed to turn out?
Yeah.
It was going to be great. I'm just doing groceries and watching TV, and I have to consciously be like, no, this is good. What I have now is good.
And normal.
And it's not so intense. And I was miserable. Kat will tell you, deep misery when I was at church. I've never been happier now that I'm out. I feel completely free. And I just don't think that you're right. It's kind of, I don't know hypnotic. I don't know how that works.
Yeah.
I think it does just get so deep within your psyche that you don't even know that you're being manipulated. You don't even realize.
Oh, aren't all the perfect conditions there? You're young, you're open, so you've gone in there quite receptively to what the person's saying, and they're a person of authority with a strong voice in that hypnotic environment with the music that underpins it all, and surrounded by 10 or 5 or 20,000 of your peers all agreeing.
it's well known in, academia and academic research that music has a profound effect on your body. And so
do tell, because this has got to be the great intersection of the AOG then, yeah?
Well, yeah, I mean, like there are what you could call music psychologists who have done studies on how music affects the brain. Even in my historical work, philosophers of music back in the 1600s would write things like, God entereth in by the door of the ear. They knew that the sensory experience of your ear was profound for your body and for your experience of the world. And this has now been backed up by science, in modern psychology.
Wow.
So, yes, I mean, as to like how deliberate or calculated it was, it's just a fact that music will have an effect on your embodied experience, of the world.
But those prophecies, those
Yes,
say hello, because it's just such a thing to do, to a young person, to say that, you know what I mean? The future's scary. Everyone around you is like uncertain and stuff, but you're the one who doesn't want it.
Yeah.
That's natural.
Yeah.
And it's what young people look to older people they're supposed to be doing, is telling you advice and what they see, and would have some brutal effects on people too.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you want, we could finish by talking through how they structure music into the service, because it's all calculated down to the minute and the second, and that's all very calculated, and and it's calculated to have a particular effect on the congregation, and that might be a nice way to sort of finish off
beautiful.
what we've been talking about.
And when we talk about calculated, do we mean somebody's having a meeting every Thursday to chart this, or is it just a sort of a thing they know? Because that's there's
an event person with a run sheet that has, at this minute and this many seconds, this happens. In the music.
Wrote that run sheet and
Yes,
it's absolutely
designed
designed
and produced that way.
Yeah.
So for those who remember finding out that I loved the David Letterman show, and I don't know if you ever watched Dave, you're a bit young, but he was always just Mr. Laid Back, cracking a joke. It was all completely, every second was apparently scripted.
How it is.
So, but this is brutal, because this is where people take their innermost vulnerabilities and themselves as such to this church, for their music. And how calculated do you mean? So how?
Well, the first, they're planning it from when you walk in, because most people are walking in 5 minutes before the service, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in that 5 minutes before the service, right on the dot on 5 minutes before the service, they run a video and music attached to it called the pre-roll. And the pre-roll, it'll have like inspirational kind of words up on the screen. It'll have like cool music in the background. And this runs for 4 minutes, 30 seconds. And then at 30 seconds prior to the service starting, this video has programmed into it a shift that takes place. There's a shift in the sound. It shifts to more kind of churchy sort of music in a lot of ways. It actually, in the time we were still there, it was playing footage from like a United concert or something as well. So it was like ramping you up for church to start.
They have like church stock footage banks that they like draw the church stock footage from and stitch it together for these opens.
So that's what the end of this video is, the last 30 seconds. So all the keen beings who are on the front row, they know as well. That's their signal. Oh, church is about to start. Let's get into it. Let's start clapping. Let's start cheering. Those of us who are in the green room, we've lined up in the corridor ready for church to start, and we hear that change in the sound, and we also know that that's when we walk onto the stage. And then that pre-roll finishes and the vocalists walk onto stage and they're clapping and they're getting ready and they're riling up the crowd. And that's when the worship set starts, which is 3 to 4 songs, isn't it? 4?
Yeah, it depends. 3 to 4. Normally
Usually
4.
And, they...
Depends on the length of the service too.
Yeah, so then they run through their 4 songs, and, usually it'll be mostly songs that the congregation knows. There might be one new song mixed in there. And then do you want to talk about the worship a little bit?
Well, it's the worship's always structured to have fast songs, then slow songs. We used to call them praise and worship. We were told not to call them that anymore because it was a weird arbitrary distinction that was made between the two complete tempos. It's like you had a fast song and slow song. So, and generally the two
Wow.
slow songs, one is like, you know, the one at the end has like this big elevated moment at the end. Often the bridge is really like a big deal, like you know, and everybody's singing woes or what did you call it?
Oh, like coming together. I meant like a
Got it.
spiritual coming together, you know, like of everything that's happened so far in the service, in that moment in the music, you know.
Yeah. So yeah, it's like this big kind of elevated moment, and then the pastor walks on stage, and the music comes underneath, and we hear the
keep playing the same song that had just been
had
the
through the
worship
chords of that song.
So the MC is speaking, they finish off playing the same song that they've just been singing, and then it switches to the offering message, which, by the way, is 2 minutes on the, like, it runs for 2 minutes, never more, never less. 2 minutes is, slot for the offering message is 2 minutes. And what the musos are doing, the musos are generally playing some kind of like jazzed up version of like a pop song. So it might be like some Coldplay riff or like some Coldplay chord progression or some other little well-known thing.
Daft Punk was a fun
Daft
one.
Punk, and they'd play it for weeks and weeks on end before they would change it. So it'd be some cool little thing they'd be playing while the offering message is being spoken. So, you know, like, oh, I'm a cool guy and I'm giving you this talk about money while this Coldplay.
It's very casual. Like the vibe is casual, like we're having a chat.
And then at 2 minutes on the dot, his time is up. So he's now he leaves. He or she leaves, the person doing the offering talk. Then the worship leader, like, they know too. At 2 minutes, they step forward, like, ready to sing. And they're being told in their ears as well, time for you to step forward and go. And then they'll sing, like, usually a short snippet of a song. It might be, it might just be like a chorus and a bridge or something of a song.
It's often requested by the pastor. So the pastor will say before the service to the worship leader very often, this is the song I want to do just before. And that happens probably about 70% of the time. If Brian's there, Brian will always have some sort of song before he speaks. And often he'll do like his daggy dad thing where he sings the song to the band.
Still doing that.
Yeah, been doing that for years.
So that worship set prior to the offering, that's 20 minutes on the dot as well. Not ever more than 20 minutes. It's limited to 20 minutes. You know, it's not like Bethel, for example, which would have like free worship for, sometimes I've heard like an hour at a time before the message you ever get to. Hillsong's not like that at all. It's strictly 20 minutes for the worship.
Okay.
And then you've got that 2 minute offering, you've got that little bit of a song, and then you've got your actual sermon after that. I think it's limited as well to about 40 minutes, isn't it?
I don't know. The numbers are probably going to be different.
That one I don't know the exact number.
They are very strict on the time. There's like a timer on the screens, which most people probably have seen those kind of things.
So if you're standing on the stage, you can see there's the timer, and there's also a countdown timer for whoever's doing that part of the service.
It goes into the red if they are
if they go over time.
So they get this little red countdown.
Yeah, good. They mustn't veer off course. Wow.
And I think that the end of the service, where there's potentially a bit of an altar call, or there's, especially in a night service, there might be a bit of an altar call, or there might be a bit of prayer time or whatever. That part is a bit more free in like how much time you can spend, but it's not a lot of time as well. Like if it were to go over probably 10 minutes or so, I think they'd get the countdown clock as well. But
they, on a 7 p.m. service, say for instance on a Sunday, they will let that worship go a bit over.
Oh yeah, people start calling out for songs they want and stuff in the, and
that's a youthy vibe, so you get to.
But particularly that opening part of the service, is very, very strictly timed, and I think that is part of the success of the Hillsong service. It's a well-produced event, got its own kind of liturgy, you could say, and people know when to stand up and sit down and clap, and because it's the same every day. It's exactly the same. You know exactly what to expect, and that's kind of really as well why they're able to like franchise it as well.
Well, I mean, everybody's got to be somewhere this afternoon, so I want to know what time I'm going to be out of here. Secret.
As an attendee, the service is not going more than like an hour and a half max.
Oh, you forgot church news.
Oh, I did forget church news. Yeah, that's in there.
The ads.
The ads.
The ad break.
The church news is before the offering message. Yeah, I forgot about that. That also runs to a certain amount of time. I don't remember how long. That must be a minute or so.
Yeah.
And if you're on stage as the band, you're required to turn around and look at it. so it's there on the big screen.
Yeah, even though you can see it on the screens out front, everybody has to turn
Everyone
around and
turns
look.
around and looks up
this.
and is like, yeah, this is awesome, like all this stupid advertising, like, you know. So that is
Advertising Brian's new book, Bobby's new book.
that's what happens straight before the offering message. So often the MC or the offering person gets up and is like, oh yeah, wasn't that awesome? Now let me tell you about bringing the tithe into the storehouse, or whatever it is, you know, like. So yeah, that's kind of the other part of that. But that's like, yeah, that's really the Hillsong service in a nutshell. You know, probably someone in the audience knows how long the sermon goes for, but
Well,
yeah.
I mean, are there any kinds of recollections of, I mean, like I'm wondering what the differences are between different points in the service, and whether those, the 2 minutes that is devoted to the offering must be a carefully planned 2 minutes for the taking up the money, the giving.
Yeah, well, that's why it ends up the same nearly every time, you know, I think.
I mean, what kind of emphasis musically is there during that particular time, if any?
You know, it's just like jazzy kind of cool music, lounge music,
the sort of stuff you'd hear in an elevator. But like, I think the point is that it's casual, you know, like if it's too intense, the pastor will turn around and be like, why is this so intense? Let's lighten it up a little bit. And then the bass player will be like, and like drop into something. So like, it really is like, they want it light, they want it casual.
Okay.
They don't want it to feel like a really intense moment, because, you know, I guess presumably it's better for it to be casual. I don't remember huge amounts of discussions musically happening around that moment. I think normally it was quite like, casual.
Here's a cool little chord progression we're going to play from this song we all know, you know?
Yeah, and they like, it's kind of, in some ways I sometimes saw the musos having a bit more fun with that music than they did with some of the other stuff. Like they could play around a little bit more, and if they played around too much though, they'd be asked to kind of tone it back. And I have seen a few occasions where the pastors turned around and gone, shh, quiet down, stop it. But yeah, I do have my funny encounter with like not reading the clock properly was that we were in the middle of worship, this huge elevated moment. We were kind of over the clock, and Brian had walked up on stage, but I was on the far end. I didn't see that Brian was on. And so we're in this huge moment of free worship, and the band's still pumping, and Brian's like yelling over the top, but for whatever reason, those in-ears, his voice wasn't in my in-ears, so I couldn't tell that he was on stage because I was looking out. When you're on the sides, you're told you're leading this part of the congregation. So I always face the side. I don't face out front if I'm on the side. I face the side to lead the people who are out in that area of the congregation. So I didn't realize, and I'm just singing my guts out over the top of Brian Houston. And I turned around while I was singing, jumping up and down, and I see him and I make eye contact with him, and he gave me the most massive death stare. And I just was like, whoop, like disappeared. Like, oh my God. But yeah, like he proper, like, you know, and like all the rest of the band is there eyeing me off as well. Like, what are you doing? And I'm there free worshiping over the top of Brian Houston. Anyway, fun times.
Because
yeah, I mean, I got off quite
that's all he has to do, isn't it? Just give you a look and then you're done. Right?
Everybody's terrified of doing the wrong thing when Brian's there, right? So you're all told Brian is coming, do the right thing, Brian's coming. But not do the right thing, but, you know, you're given, it's into that. We have to make sure the service is really good today because Brian's coming in.
Oh, it was next level at Hills too. If there was word that Brian was coming, they were all like, just like pissing their pants. Like it was just so much like over the top reaction that Brian was going to be there. And like, it just made me feel sick.
But the pastors will let you know, and they'll do it in front of the congregation as well if you're doing the wrong thing, right? So like I had a couple of times they started trying to roster creative team on, if you were a vocalist, they try to roster you on to do the lyrics. So they put me in the back room to do lyrics. And I was so terrified because I had seen the way the pastors go at like people who don't get the lyrics, and even the worship pastors as well. If you don't get the lyrics on time, they'll like be like, what's going on with the lyrics during the rehearsal, especially they'll be like, lyrics are wrong, da, 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 and like you'll hear about it. And the same is with like if you're doing graphics and they're throwing like verses up on the screen and the pastor and you put the wrong verse up. Like I'd seen people in front of the entire congregation lay into volunteers for doing the wrong thing at the wrong time. And you don't want to be that person. Like you don't want to be the guy who did the wrong thing at the wrong time and then got singled out for the wrong reason. You know, you want to be singled out for the word of prophecy, but you don't want to be singled out to be told, what do you think? Which, you know, I saw you know, countless pastors do that sort of thing, and it was horrible. Every time it happened, the congregation just turned to ice as well. Everybody was like, oh.
Yeah, it was awkward.
Everybody just felt bad for the person that was getting berated. I don't think anybody was like condemning them for putting the wrong verse up.
It was like seeing behind the curtain for a moment. You know?
Yeah, it's like,
no
you
one
know,
wants that.
who is this? You know, it's like the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain. All of a sudden you're like, oh, they're really, really bad and petty.
Yeah.
But,
like Robert Ferguson was one of the worst for that. He would just be like, no, this is wrong. And he'd just like,
He's a deeply petty individual. But,
have a go.
Anyway, in my opinion.
I mean, looking at you thinking it's kind of like taking down reports of Scientology horrors. Also, do you know what I mean? Like we're actually just making statements and accounts kind of. I've got to say, it's pretty horrible to have heard these stories on a small level 20 years ago, and now to hear that has metastasized. What's that word? Metastasized into, you know, it's now everywhere in the standard. And how does that replicate? And just, I mean, I guess we know, but
well, we replicate that culture because that's what we're seeing. That is what is seen to be the correct way of behaving. And you know, I was never really in an authority position to do that, and I'm not the sort of person to ever do that to someone. I just, you know, I'm a theater maker. I collaborate with people, and I genuinely love mistakes. I think mistakes are really beautiful moments of honesty, especially in a performance setting. And I really love embracing the mistake in a performance. And, you know, like I've done hundreds and hundreds of shows over the years, and my favorite, most memorable ones are the ones where, you know, shit goes wrong, right? I just think about how we never let that happen at church. And if it ever did happen, that was when, you know, things would fly, and we would never let a mistake happen. And it's a culture of perfectionism, which is deeply ingrained in the people who are there. Like, you become a perfectionist because you have to be. There's no room for mistake. There's no room for error if you're one of the, you know, if you're not part of the elite, you know, private jet flying exclusive individuals with $6,000 phone cases, you know.
In terms of it replicating too, like, can I just say, if Gary Clark was speaking at Hillsong London, that whole structure was out the window. Like, he just would be on that stage for just such an awfully long amount of time, and the stuff that would come out of his mouth, like, you know, it's not surprising that, you know, he ended up getting kicked out because of like a faux pas in what he was saying, you know, on that stage.
Is that the official line? Do we now kind of accept that? Because Gary's just gone lost. Like, do you remember being John Malkovich? And he was
wandered into.
You know, like, I don't know what he said about Black Lives Matter, but I know that.
No, he wasn't into it. He was like, it's someone else's problem. So,
but like before, you know, when I was there 10 years before, like in 2013, 14, like, the stuff that come out of his mouth was outrageous at sometimes, you know, and people would just like go, oh, Gary, he said that horrible thing about someone, or he just totally dismissed someone from the platform. And he would do this like routinely. Whenever he was on stage, you could predict he's going to say something awful about someone or something. And not only that, but he'd waffle, you know, he'd talk. He wouldn't have the 40-minute sermon. He'd have, you just never know when he's going to finish.
And nobody liked his messages. That was the other thing. Like, everybody would just be like, what was Gary on about this week? Nobody knew what he was on about. Nobody could tell you. Every time I was there, which was quite regularly while I was in Europe, was like, I was like, what is Gary on? And yet everybody would be like, oh yeah, Gary. Oh, but his messages aren't very good. And what was he doing in leadership? Who even knows? Like, he's just
how does somebody keep their job like that? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. Like, he got on board with the liturgy, you know, like he was doing his own thing. It was the Gary show. You know, if he was in charge of that service, he'd be doing the offering message, he'd be doing the MC, he'd be talking for an hour at a time in a sermon, or however long, a painfully long amount of time. And you just get to the end of that service and you're like, oh my goodness, like, Gary, I've just had Gary in my face for this awful amount of time. Like, you know. You're
like, just finish. Oh my God.
It was like he
gets so hungry too. Like, I get so hungry by lunch.
Like 7 p.m. service, you're starting to think about going to Five Guys afterwards, you know? Like,
well,
so
so he's allowed to veer off course though.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he can say whatever he wants. He's like, until he said too much, apparently.
And then
But,
it was all over.
Yeah.
But
But I mean, also he had been from what we understand of what was going on with staff during the COVID period, he was making them turn up during the peak of COVID.
Okay.
He wasn't work from home.
the UK had a very serious lockdown for 9 months or something. And people were being forced to come into the office, for no reason, and all this sort of stuff.
Forced to do things that really compromise their safety,
So in terms of what actually ended Gary's time in the end, it could be any number of things, but
I'm sure there was some sort of HR
he certainly had a
complaint.
reputation for saying some pretty out there things on that stage.
But can you imagine, he just didn't get rostered on again?
Yeah.
Seriously, do you remember 2 years ago? And Brian was like, yeah, he's going to be the new global me. Did he not say that? Gary, you're next. Get out.
Whispers of things in our word that I don't remember.
But I'm sure this was on stage. He gave this whole thing, and this is Gary, and I'm stepping aside because I'm not stepping down. I'm just stepping over here, but I'm not letting go. And Gary's going to be me, and then Gary's just never got rostered.
Well, I heard that he went onto the board or something, but he's clearly not on the board now, right?
And that's another wonderful Leaving Hillsong sudden ending. I realised at that point that Kat had only a short amount of time before she had to go to an interview. So we met again and we talked some more. So there's more to come. That wasn't goodbye. In fact, I kind of don't want to really say goodbye to these guys because I'm like, I've got more questions. I've just got some more questions. It's all so interesting. Thank you so much for spending time with us today and sharing this conversation. They're just such a wealth of perspective and insight, and yeah, I'm learning so much. It's Anzac Day today, ANZAC. If you're not familiar, please take some time to have a look. There's a few strange traditions that go on during the remembrance of Australia's service in war. So it's a public holiday here, and shops are shut till 1. It's one of those days. So I hope this chat kind of filled any of those long rainy hours over here. I do think it's important that this pod is distinctly Australian, given it's where it all kind of started. Well, part 2 anyway. New Zealand has a lot to be explored for that. And that's the reason why this pod is always on at 5 o'clock, or, as close to. Originally because of the gap that church left. But, when you've been an Australian and you have to stay up till 2 a.m. to watch a sports event or anything like that internationally, I just thought, you're going to do it the Australian time zone. Sort of alienate 90% of the world, but, it's time we got a mention. Keep the feedback and the likes and the suggestions and everything coming. I am so grateful to everybody who makes contact and supports, as well as my wonderful patrons. Become one of them if you feel led. Take very good care of yourselves. Be kind to yourselves. Pick someone around you to be kind to randomly. Why not? Keep an eye out, please, for social media stuff, because I've had a few technical issues. So that'll be the best place to keep up. Thank you again for your time and input into this really important conversation. Things are changing really fast with the introduction of all the criminal activity. So, heavy times, but at least we got each other this time. And the kindest thing you can do is to keep leaving Hillsong. Talk soon. Bye.
day.